We're really excited to be chatting to you guys today. And let's kick off with a fairly simple question about the change that the pandemic has wrought in our world.
The pandemic, of course, brought a lot of tragedy to people's lives. And at the same time, I think there are some benefits that have come out of at least some aspects of it. And in particular, one I'd like to call out, of course, there was acceleration of certain technologies around captions and video conferencing, et cetera. But another thing is just the workplace environment. What we've ended up on is, at least in some companies, a world where we have so much more flexibility than we had pre-pandemic. And for my team, that has made an enormous difference. We've been able to hire people who work from home who would not have joined Google otherwise if they didn't have the flexibility to either work from home or to work from whatever city they were in without needing to relocate. So in that way, I think it has been a huge blessing, and I'm glad that we have the flexibility then to continue this, even though the pandemic is at a different stage.
Building the diversity within our own organizations breeds better accessibility along the way. And so I would agree, being able to have hybrid models and individuals who might otherwise not have been, coming into our offices really improves the makeup of our companies and the work we can do across the board, not just in accessibility, but in every area. We've certainly found this last few years that the makeup of the world's population has changed. There's an article that came out a week or two ago here in the States about the fact that there are 2 million individuals who are working through long COVID and the potential of what disability might bring in their worlds. And so I think just the increase in individuals who probably self-identify as having a disability has grown so much over the last couple of years.
Jenny, I wonder, just on that particular point, I wonder whether the silos are slightly different inside organizations as well. That is accessibility a little bit closer and more easily connected into the decision making, just because these work patterns have changed a bit. Have you seen that shift? Maybe not just that people are aware of why accessibility is important, but maybe we're in more conversations than we were in before. There's a little bit less formality, and people are trying to find ways around in this hybrid world.
I don't like silos, but I don't like them. But I do think that, pandemic, which we're still in, is a disabling event. It, as my dear colleagues have already pointed out, it grew the disability community in ways that we didn't want, but it also grew the empowerment of people with disabilities, which then has driven an acceleration in innovation and need and demand for accessibility. We're seeing that. It's hard to pinpoint metrics on this, but LinkedIn's a nice source. I think a 33% increase in conversations on accessibility, and 117% increase in the number of jobs in accessibility. And there's lots of other metrics that are beginning to give us the benchmark that illustrates the growth that we're seeing. And bluntly, I think a lot of that was because the virtualization of a workforce empowered people, and also made it really important for people to not just self-identify or consider self-identifying, but for asking for what they needed to be successful. So,
and I guess then, as well, as we look forward, then we're hoping that more of the same, in the sense of the positive angles you're talking about, that this is a springboard effect. Are there particular priorities for you in the way you're working now that I'm thinking about, things like culture change, those sort of broader picture stuff that we can talk about in general?
Guys, I think there's always a positive push when there is more demand for an area. The hard prioritization that exists, which is always the infinite resources of time and materials, which can impact accessibility, becomes a little easier. So when you see more demand coming in, you're not having to, we don't talk ROI, by the way. That I don't think that's anything that any of us really talk about in that way. Accessibility is a given, but there's always this hard conversation of prioritization that happens. Yes, that does become easier, But I also think what's become really important is how we work together, not just within a company, but amongst companies as well.
Yeah, I think one of the other pieces to this is also that while the pandemic has certainly gotten that snowball growing a lot faster over the last 2 years, it wasn't just that it's happened over this time frame. I think for all of us, we've had the consistent drumbeat for years of prioritizing accessibility within our companies. And, the fact that all three of us have the roles that we have and have had them for many years is a testament to the commitment that companies have had. And so I think that there's been, a lot of groundwork put in long before the pandemic. And I think a lot of within our companies, different groups wanting to do good work in this area. And a piece of that is also that even prior to the pandemic, the communities have found their voice and they're using it. And they've been out in the world really letting companies know what's important to them. And I think starting with that, at least within Apple, we've had a lot of teams who have come to us and said, we have this great idea. How do we bring this to fruition? And how do we work with you? And how do we work with members of the community and make sure we're doing it right? And kind of all of those things that really end with making magic. And then on top of that, you add a pandemic, which suddenly makes all of this even more relevant and timely. And so I think it's kind of all together worked to help each of us, maybe make our jobs a little bit easier. And when we go out and talk to other people within our organizations, but as well, I think as Jenny was touching on at the very end of this, really collaborating.
I've been working in this area for almost 10 years now, and I've seen just this huge shift over time. And while the pandemic perhaps accelerated a little bit, we were already on that slope of it being more a part of people's consciousness, more a priority for the business. And as Jenny said, not because of ROI, but because our companies know that it's important. Our customers know that it's important. We all are in this because we care and we want to help each other and collaborate, which we do all the time.
I'm just thinking about people outside the room who are wishing that they were in your position, thinking, yeah, that sounds great for you guys. But in my back to base, the number of times we get asked about ROI, I could probably do an ROI on having a sensible answer to that, make more money by having a sensible answer than by saying it's not relevant. But there still is this debate about how you keep it on the agenda and how you make it important. So I don't want to jump onto the chance without you passing on your tips or recognizing that maybe it's different in your organization to others.
Yeah, I think we are in a privileged position. And part of it is because of the great work that Jenny and Sarah have done in socializing this in their companies. And so we don't have to always make the case like we used to, but that's not true for every company. And so I think there is a strong business case for accessibility as well. Part of it is just around sales. And I see, based on our interactions with suppliers and customers, that there is so much more demand for accessibility in the market. And I know that we have a lot of sales that we would not have been able to close if not for the accessibility of our products. And so if someone, a viewer, is working at a smaller company and they're not seeing that demand yet, I can assure them that they will, because I am seeing that in the marketplace. And then there are other business reasons for accessibility around increasing the size of the user base, and around legal and PR and making higher quality products. I don't like to talk about curb cut effects too much because that is not why I work on accessibility. But I think all of us here know that if you make a product work better for people with disabilities, it's going to be a better product overall, because we all have situational disabilities. And so those are cases that people can make to their management chain when they're getting pushback on prioritization.
Right. I think the next bit on then is the influence you're having on your network of customers and the people within your ecosystems. I mean, your products sit at the heart of all sorts of different services and that people rely on every day, whether it's in education or finances or any business, entertainment. So how are you seeing that influence grow in the ecosystems around you? You know, the customers are coming to you for your services. And how is that changing? Because that's the ripple effect then, I guess, of you working alongside them and changing and making their products and services more accessible.
Well, I think in some ways the last question and this one kind of go together. I think what Eve beautifully put was the ecosystem growth that there is around accessibility. And I'll be candid, Microsoft definitely had times where it went through very hardcore ROI conversations. What is the percentage of people that will be able to benefit from a product? What is the ROI from innovating, engineering, developing for that base? And is that cost effective? That is somewhat of a trap. And we did fall into that. And I think that's a lot of learning that we've taken over the years, is that thinking on that kind of level. So if you're understanding the privilege we have now, but also the learning we've had through the journey, is to more think about it from an ecosystem perspective. If you're designing with accessibility and you're designing inclusively and you're designing for people with disabilities, you are quite candidly developing a better product that will empower you in all facets of life, whether it's home, work, whether it's getting to and from work. You're going to be creating products that are more empowering, that are more attractive, that have much greater functionality and work across the spectrum of human.
I'd agree as well. I think as Eve said, it's not about the curb cuts, but when you are designing, thinking creatively about everyone who wants to use your product, you just make better products. By building for the margins, it helps everyone. And to give a quick example of this on something which kind of gets to your question, not necessarily of sectors, but I think as just lifestyle, human, wanting to use everything and live their lives the way they want to, is we built a feature into Apple Watch about 2 years ago called Assistive Touch. And it was built for individuals with upper body limb differences. And the idea, we basically worked with teams all over Apple to use the hardware underneath the watch to be able to understand muscle and tendon movements and be able to drive the watch one-handed. And what we found actually in the year after was that there were tons of people who didn't self-identify as having an upper body limb difference. They weren't amputees. They weren't, they were just snowboarders at the top of mountains who didn't want to take their gloves off, or researchers in education who were, up to their elbows in biological matter that needed to dictate or to answer a phone call, who were using this. And it became so popular that we actually pulled part of that feature out into a feature called Quick Actions to just do one simple thing with your watch if you don't need to rely on this all the time. But that's something that has a huge ripple effect, not just for individuals who are limb different, but for anybody who wants to use their watch in an alternative way.
I've been associated with Inclusive Africa. Jenny, I know that you spoke there. I know that it's an interesting change, I think, over the last couple of years. That was held up because of the pandemic, actually. So, it was only this year that actually happened. But this seems to me it's marking a change in the way that we think about the sort of global networks around accessibility. Certainly, I've noticed that in the last 2 or 3 years that the work in Africa that's emerging is showing us that there's a lot of other different things that we need to think about. And also, we work quite closely with organizations in India, for example, and that's another sort of take on that change. How do you see the sort of accessibility community? I'm particularly thinking about the way we work together and support each other. How do you see that changing as we sort of begin to think about this difference in the marketplace and therefore the people in those markets who have different needs? And how do you see us working together to enable that, to make, to bring that equality and inclusion across those bigger, broader pictures of what we consider?
It was another privilege to be able to get over there earlier this year. I wasn't the only. There were folks. Eve had folks over there. There were folks from many other companies and tech companies and broad companies over there for several events that were happening in that time. And I would say the most powerful thing that I took away, having spent some time outside of the cities in rural Africa, in Kenya and Malawi, and it's one of 40 plus countries in the Africa region, was the importance of not just how we work together, but also how we work together with our partners in other societal efforts. So connectivity, energy. I visited several schools and places where I can see the kid with a disability that needs everything that we have, regardless of the technology in front of them, but they're also struggling with power, and they're struggling with basics, water, food. But I will say there was a massive appetite for what we had, and I think a shock that technology, particularly some of the AI and captioning, was as evolved as it was, and as helpful as it was, and freely available. The cost parameters, I think, become very, very important. So I took away a lot from that, and I think that bluntly goes back to that earlier point of how we collaborate across area, but also how we all know one another. We work together, we chit chat all the time, and we scheme a lot. How can we solve tough problems? How do we make AI smarter for voice recognition and speech recognition for impacted voice? Was our recent effort where we really work to collaborate, not just Microsoft, Apple, and Google, but also Meta and Amazon coming together on a singular issue to really identify how we could tackle that together. I think that for me is the biggest headwind that I take away this year. Is we need to accelerate, and the way to accelerate is to do that together.
One of the things that our three companies do, to the extent possible, is we give away accessibility services free to users. We also give away tooling for developers and documentation for developers, so that anybody anywhere in the world, regardless of economics, is able to access the knowledge that we have generated as bigger, better funded companies.
And is there another project around the corner, I guess, then? Because I don't think that was that wasn't the first time you've collaborated, obviously, but it was a fantastic, that collection of stuff you've just talked about, their voice. Is there one being hatched that we'll see coming around the corner?
Well, I think give us a little bit of time. We certainly have just launched the Speech Accessibility Project, and to actually make sure we give it its due, I do want to say the URL for it is speechaccessibilityproject.com. And for all of us, for our three companies, as well as Amazon and Meta, it is a great opportunity for us to really look at some of the hard problems around speech, for which we are better together. No single company would probably be able to solve this problem as well as all of us, really looking at what's the right thing to do for the community, and it's to get as much data as we possibly can. So I think we're all super excited about this, and I think once we're able to get a little farther into it and get some data out of it, then I think we start probably, as Jenny said, considering whether we scheme again.
Always scheming, always. So while we are the coalition of companies coming together on this, we feel really fortunate to have the great power of University of Illinois as the host, and also nonprofit partners like Team Gleason, who are helping us to gather those that speech data. So this really, when we say it's better together, it's not. This is a great example of how the community, the academic world, and the tech industry can really make a difference, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And all the users participating.
Yes.
Yes.
I just interested in, so for AbilityNet, and I know for you guys as well, the profession feels like it's growing. we're struggling to recruit people with specialist skills and accessibility. I mean, that's a great thing. I just wonder what that pressure's doing in your world. How are we going to grow this sort of capability in our organizations, and particularly on the scale that you guys are working?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things obviously is trying to ensure that individuals, when they're coming out of their university experience, are not just introduced to accessibility before they leave, but get a strong foundation in it. And as you look at groups, another one is we're throwing out all the buzzword groups here, is Teach Access, which was started here in the US, but is working on expansion. And they are doing an amazing job of really building accessibility into the foundation of universities' programs on computer science and engineering and things like that, to make sure that students really get that this is a core part of the job. Regardless of what your job title is, you need to understand accessibility as a piece of that. And so I think we're kind of seeing that from the perspective of the engineering. We're also seeing more students with disabilities getting into programs and really trying to make themselves really not just attractive to companies, but well versed in what they need to know. So I think it's a mix between that, finding and providing the right tools to members of the disability community to be the voice within organizations, but also just making sure that everybody who wants to get into technology sees this as a key part of what they do.
The great thing about this space is that we're biased. It's the really coolest space in tech, right? So we get to sit, wallow in design challenge, listen and work with our own lived experience, people in the community, advocacy groups, and broad disability groups, pull in that feedback, prioritize and figure out how we're going to build and methodically come out with some really cool stuff. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? So I do think one of the pragmatic challenges we have right now, we're definitely seeing a trend of people who want to convert in. So I'm still not seeing the right number of jobs for the demand that we're getting. Every job that we post does get heavy application. And not always from people who have accessibility experience, but they have relevant skills. So we methodically make sure we do have a mix, right, of folks who are accessibility professionals, or those who want to get into this and bring different skills in, whether they're developers, whether they're brilliant program managers, whether they are fantastic at working in support or whatever it may be. So I do want people to know that the barrier to entry, it isn't up there. I mean, go and get all the qualifications in the world that you can. That's always helpful, but go for it, right? Use the tools available to you. Know that in LinkedIn, you can now say that you're interested in roles like accessibility advocate. And you can put your interest out there and come on into the party.
There's also a lot of free resources online, free courses, free documentation, free tooling, just things that people can use to learn best practices, whether they are a designer, an engineer, a tester, or if they just want to go into those fields. It's not too late. Just even if you didn't get it in your formal education, you can still do it.
I just want to say a big thank you. What you've done, I think, is just brought a load of big ideas together. You've shown that the power of the collaboration as well. It's really clear in terms of the connections that you make all the time, and how much more we can do together, as you say. So I just want to say a huge thank you for joining me today, and for your support for TechShare Pro and AbilityNet and all the other things that are going on around us anyway. And I look forward to catching up with. I will have caught up with you, Sarah, of course, when we play this out, and I look forward to seeing you, Eve and Jenny, soon. So thank you so much for joining us, and take care.